Chapter 6. 2 years had gone by, and I reached the age of 12. I was old enough to stay up all night on weekends, and most of the time, I did watching old scary movies. Mother was taking her medicine, and she was back to the mother I had remembered. One night, my aunt and I was hanging out. We recorded music on her reel-to-reel recorder, and we ended up watching scary movies with my favorite Fright Night man, Cool Ghoul. My mother was up for a while, walking around the house as she normally did, sort of watching me off and on. My aunt had retired for the night, and I was determined to see the sun rise. It had gotten rather late, but I stayed up watching a Vincent Price movie. Mom poked her head in the dining room. "You ain't sleepy yet?" she said. "No, ma'am." "Don't you think you should be going to bed now?" "I'm all right. I want to finish this movie." I had convinced her that I was fine, and she left me alone. I kept hearing her walk around upstairs, but I was consumed with my movie and didn't think anything of it. As the movie progressed, I heard a knock on the door, and I felt like I had jumped to the moon and back. I remember thinking, who could that be at this hour? I had aunts who hung out late and often dropped by unannounced. Maybe it's one of them. I went to the door and pulled the curtain back and didn't see anyone. The first thing I thought was that the neighbor's kids were playing a joke and had come knocking on the door and ran. I stood at the door and peeped through the curtain where no one could see me, hoping to catch those kids. As I was looking out, another knock came to the door, but I didn't see anyone. How could someone be knocking at the door and I don't see them? After all, I was looking out through the slit in the curtains. Was I imagining it? It was those scary movies I was looking at. They had somehow become a reality. I was becoming frightened by every knock. The knocking was getting persistent, so I thought the kids were knocking at the bottom of the stairs, off to the side where I couldn't get a visual. Yeah, that's it. They're on the side of the steps. So I flung the door open, and much to my surprise, there, lying at the top of the stairs, was my mother. The moment was silent. Chills went up and down my spine. The blood rushed to the top of my head, and I felt faint. "Oh my God!" I screamed. "What happened, Mama? Who did this to you? How did you get outside?" Her words would haunt me to this day. "I jumped out of the third floor window. Call an ambulance." I ran upstairs screaming to my grandmother, who thought I was having some bad dream. Granny, Mama, she, come quickly, hurry up." "Calm down, I can't understand you." I literally pulled her downstairs to see for herself. At that moment, things went black for me. I was standing there, crying and watching my mom lay on that floor, and there was nothing I could do about it. My mind went blank, and I don't remember the ambulance, the police, or any of that. I remembered hearing sirens, but I didn't see anything. More darkness, gross darkness. It was surrounding me, covering me, consuming me, and overshadowing me. I couldn't breathe. I was numb. I couldn't move. What would I tell my brothers now? My aunt ran downstairs and I sort of came back. "Are you okay? What happened?" I attempted to explain to her, but my mouth wouldn't move. My grandmother had gotten her purse and needed a ride to the hospital. She started telling my aunt what happened, and she couldn't believe something like that had happened. That night would haunt everyone involved. Talking about a scary movie, that night I lived one. It was the scariest movie of all. It was my life. It was so traumatizing that it changed my sleeping patterns. I once slept like a dead person. Now I hear everything that moves and I suffer with sleep loss. Mother was in the hospital with a broken back and a few cracked ribs. She attempted for the first time in her life suicide. What was she thinking? Why would she want to leave us? We needed her. No matter how sick she was still our mother, and kids need their mother. My brother asked me the next day where our mother was, and I had to be the one to tell him that she was in the hospital. I made him believe that she was in there for her usual stay. He had gotten used to her comings and goings. I couldn't bring myself to tell him that our mother had attempted suicide. I just couldn't tell him. Sometimes, when you look at the face of a loved one and they have a look of innocence, you just can't bring yourself to destroy that. Mother stayed in the hospital for about 6 weeks, and when she came home, she had a body cast, but she could walk. Once Mother came home from the hospital, I was curious about why she had attempted such a drastic feat. When I talked to her about it, she told me it was the voices she heard. She said that the voices had told her to jump so that she could end her misery and be with Jesus. When she fought the urge to jump, she said that the voices commanded her to jump and told her that this would be the best thing that ever happened to her. At the time, the voices were strong and they overpowered her natural thinking process. Her mind created a staircase flowing from the third floor window into the backyard. She was convinced that she was going to be with Jesus, and she walked out of that window in a delusional state and almost ended her life. Although she was on her medication, she was still exhibiting some symptoms. She couldn't get rid of those voices. They rode her like a farmer riding his tractor, day and night to get the job done. The voices had a mission. They wanted to destroy the person within, my mother. Granny stayed home from work for about 3 weeks to care for her. Then everything else was left up to me as usual. Plus, I still had 2 little ones to look after. Every day after school, Granny left for work, and I stayed home to tend to the house. Mother had to be watched around the clock, and so did the baby. I had little or no time to spend with the 2 friends that I had, or myself. This was a never ending saga. It seemed like months and months before I could escape to my dad's house. The visits with him began to be less because I just didn't have the time. Granny eventually stopped working, but when she wasn't working, she was out of town with her church group or taking Mother out of town to see some psychic or soothsayer. She was really trying all she knew to help Mother to get well. She went to one guy who told her that someone had done something to Mother really evil, like some spell or something. She went to another place that had her bathing Mother in some weird herbs. None of these things worked, and I think she paid money for them. Life for me had picked up a little. I got to go out and play more and hang out with my friends. I met more friends and got caught up in the world and all that it had to offer. I fell into using marijuana and drinking wine so that I could cope with having a dysfunctional family life. I did most of it to help me deal with going home. I found myself more and more relaxed and mellowed out. This became my new way of dealing with my mom. Over time, I was able to hang out with my dad more and having just a little bit more fun with my other family. Although I would be miles away at my dad's, Mother was always in the back of my mind. My heart was always with her. She was still wearing her cast, and crazy talk was still coming out of her mouth. She always thought that my granny was out to get her. She thought people were talking about her all the time. She was paranoid all the time. This, too, was a part of her disease. It came with voices, and those voices made her scared. The voices planted things in her head, and she believed them to be true. She didn't trust anyone, especially Granny. Surely her own mom was out to kill her, at least in her mind.